Okay. Okay. Good evening, afternoon, and morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us today at our Friday Gyana series with Raghu Anantanarayanan ji on Antaranga Yoga. So I welcome all of you and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Priya Sukwani and I'm so thrilled to have Raghu ji join us today as our guest speaker. So today's event is brought to you by Sarveda. At Sarveda, our vision is to touch the lives of people around the world with the wealth that yoga, Ayurveda, and mindful living has to offer. Our platform offers curated resources, courses, consultations with leading Vaidyas and yoga practitioners, and our range of eco-friendly yoga and Ayurvedic products. We have with us today Arjun Arora, the founder of Sarveda, who is a yoga practitioner, musician, and digital consultant. He's been learning, practicing, and teaching yoga with his wife Saja in their studio in Lebanon. Our guest for today is Raghu Anantanarayanan ji, who has been mentored by three extraordinary teachers, namely Jiddu Krishnamurti ji, Yogacharya Krishnamacharya ji, and Pulenberg. He was intimately involved with them for more than a decade from his late 20s. This engagement not only transformed him, it evoked from him his service orientation, his sadhana. His work revolves around helping individuals, groups, and organizations discover their dharma and become the best that they can be. This, he believes, aligns with his own personal sadhana. Formerly trained as an engineer with an MS in biomedical engineering from IIT Madras, he has been in immersive involvement in questions of human life. In academic areas, he has been co-founder of the Sumedhas Academy of Human Context since 1995 and of the Barefoot Academy of Governance with TIS since 2012. As director of Flame Tao Nowhere Private Limited, Raghuji spans the commercial world of consulting by helping redesign the client organization for greater alignment and synergy. Raghuji has also authored several books like Learning Through Yoga, The Totally Aligned Organization, Leadership Dharma, Arjuna, the Timeless Metaphor, and Organizational Development and Alignment. Currently, his wife and he, donning their roles as chief mentors, are working on nurturing people on a sacred quest at Ritambara Ashram, situated in the beautiful Nilgiris. Ritambara is a community of seekers engaged in the quest of Rasatmik living. The members share a common concern for the current ecological, socio-cultural, and political state of the world, and find deep wisdom and hope in the teachings and practices of yoga as a way forward from these crises. The activities of Ritambara include active co-learning through inner work, group study, and practice of the various aspects of Ashtanga Yoga, exploratory dialogues on different facets of Indian tradition, and facilitating learning spaces and opportunities for others on a similar quest. So as I was reading this, I realized that Arjun and Raghuji are alumni of the same university, which is IIT Madras. So that's like our trivia. With this, I would just like to invite Raghuji to share a little bit with us about himself and also speak to us about Antaranga Yoga. So welcome Raghuji and thank you so much for joining us. It's an absolute pleasure and honor to have you today with us.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just start with a small prayer to my Guru. Yeah. Om Sri Krishna Vagishayatishwarabhyam Samprapta Chakrankana Bhashyasaram Srinutnarangendra Yatau Samarpitasvam Shri Krishna Maryam Guruvarya Mire Virodhe Kartike Mase Shatatara Kritodayam Yogacharyam Krishnamaryam Guruvaryaham Aham Bhaje. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Om Yogena Chittasya Padena Vacham Malam Sharirasya Cha Vaidyakena Yopakarottam Praparam Muninam Patanjalim Pranjaliranatosmi Abahu Purushakaram Shankhachakrasidharinam Sahasrashirasam Vetam Pranamami Patanjalim. Om Srimate Anantaya Nagarajaya Namo Namaha. Hari Om. Yeah. Okay. I thought we were going to have a small dialogue with a couple of you. Yeah, I'm only seeing my face on the screen and it's very disconcerting. Like talking to a mirror, no? Yeah, this is much better. Okay. So shall we get started off? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me just tell you a few things to start with about Antaranga Yoga. And then I'd like you to ask me questions and let's have a conversation. Yeah. Yeah. Since we talked the other day, I was wondering how to introduce this idea. Okay. So I'm going to I'm going to invite everybody to do a small thought experiment. Okay. So let's imagine that, let's say, the two of you whom I can see and other people have only heard about and seen pictures of either ice or steam. So whenever somebody uses the word water, they've either shown you pictures of ice cubes or they've shown you pictures of steam. Okay. This is, like, uh, this is what you've been exposed to, right? I'm just this poor traditional Indian, and you come to me and you say, I want water. So I bring you a glass of water and you say, what is this? This is not water. So I start wondering and I'm saying, what is water then? Right? And then we have a communication problem because the pictures of water in your mind are either ice or steam. And for me, it's a normal glass of water. Yeah. So these days, when people talk about yoga, this is the problem that confronts me. Yeah, just a couple of days back, or yeah, maybe it was just this morning, I was watching a very erudite person, a young person who actually I might have met when he was a little kid in Adyar, right? I think I know his father. So he was, talking about neurophysics, and he's studying people with problems, psychological problems. He's talking about yoga. And there are two pictures he shows whenever he uses the word yoga. One picture is what you'll see very commonly in Amar Chitrakatha comics. No, one person standing on one leg, Bhagiratha Asana, Bhagirathas tapas. That's one picture that he shows. Then the other picture that he shows is somebody sitting here in one, navel gazing kind of pose, right? So these are the two pictures you have seen of yoga. I have seen a completely different picture of yoga, right? So what I've decided to do is to help you and at least call it Antaranga Yoga. So when you say water, I say this is special water sort of a thing. So you don't
Great.
get very
Take your
angry
time.
with me when I bring something as plain and simple as clear water and you have another picture in your mind. Yeah, yeah,
No, but
this is what is
interestingly,
happening to yoga these days. Yes, Arjun.
no, but interestingly, you chose an example where water is in three states. So are you trying to say that everybody's interpretation is almost the same?
Pardon? No, they're not at all the same because they've not shown you water. They've only shown you these two extremes. No?
Hmm.
Yeah,
Just
so you can say that, yeah, steam is also water, ice is also water. But that's not water, no? Those are
Right.
special states. Those are two extreme states of water. One when it gets too cold, one when it gets too hot.
True.
Yeah. So this whole field of yoga is also, in my mind, has become something like that. Yeah. They either show you the highly crystallized asana form, which is the ice form for me, and call it yoga, or they don't show you anything. Nah? They show you some gaseous material, which is your steam, and they call that yoga. So the bulk of yoga is somewhere in between. Nah?
that's true.
So we'll
It
have to
also
explore
has
what this in between is and so on. And hopefully people get some sense of what it is. Yes, Priya.
no, I was just saying that when these images are projected to us, like all of us have like certain stereotypes in our mind saying this is what yoga
Correct.
is. So
Correct. Yeah, that's true. And then you have to get out of the stereotypes in your mind, no? Yeah, so Antaranga Yoga is actually, yeah, it's very interesting that you talk about stereotypes because getting out of stereotypes about the world, about yourself, and so on might be one interesting way of looking at Antaranga Yoga.
And
Yeah.
how easy or hard is that?
Pardon?
How easy or hard is to think in a non-stereotypical way?
Um, it's like, you know what, I'm feeling like, speaking in analogies today. Yeah, because I don't know how else to discuss this. No? See, to me, the critical sutra to understand in Yoga Sutra is the second chapter, the first sutra of the second chapter, which uses three very critical words. And recently I read a very interesting paper that says that many of the Sanskrit words are not just words. He calls it word concepts. Okay, so there are three word concepts. The first word concept is tapas, right? The second is swadhyaya, and the third is ishvara pranidhana. Now, again, in the word tapas, there is a bit of a problem because I saw one show on either Discovery Channel or something where they actually show a group of people in the Himalayas who are sitting on hot, they keep a rock, heat up the rock and sit on it and call it tapas. Okay, this is the most distorted idea of tapas I've seen. And there are papers being written where the esoteric of the Indian is projected as though it's the norm. Okay, so actually people saying there's some commentator and obviously he's a Westerner talking about tapas and he calls this tapas, which I can't understand, nah? Because fundamentally the word tapas means to ripen, right? And there's a heat of the body, there's a heat of digestion, there's a heat of thought, dhyana agni, and so on. and how one tends these fires inside and therefore brings this persona to ripen is a very critical idea in tapas. So what happens when this ripening takes place is whatever is unprocessed kacha in me becomes ripe and falls off, right? And if I don't run behind what has fallen off, then whatever is left in me is more and more and more pure prana without any other mixtures, without any malam. That's the word that yoga would use. Yeah. So that is one very critical thing. And this is not just an external action, right? I can do asana practice and it need not be tapas. Most of the time it's not, especially, I don't think beer yoga is tapas, right? So at least drinking simple water when you're doing asana practice might go towards tapas, certainly not drinking beer. Yeah. So when you're doing asana practice, Krishnamacharya would often use the term doing samyama or doing dhyana on the body. Yeah. And if you really do this, then you get in touch with a lot of tensions which are actually unresolved psychological issues that you hold in your body. Yeah. So tapas is actually using asana and pranayama for this, right? I'll come back to you with a story about this, right? The second thought, the concept word is swadhyaya. Yeah. So swadhyaya means going closer and closer and closer to your true self. Swa adhi ayane. Yeah. So moving step by step, right? And the nicest analogy of swadhyaya is taking an onion and peeling the onion. Yeah. So what happens when you start peeling the onion is the first layer are these dry outer layer comes off. And then you start peeling it. Usually you use a knife, no, to start peeling. So you have to be very careful, right? You can't be thinking of something and peeling because then you might cut yourself. So you have to use a sharp mind and slowly start peeling the layers. And as you peel the layers, tears will come. And you keep peeling it more and more. And finally, there is nothing. Yeah. And you are left with the smell of onion for some time. And even that will go away. So as you move within, you have to keep uncovering layers of what you think is yourself, right? Until you come to a point when you just stumble upon the consciousness that is watching this process, right? And when you come there, you start understanding what Ishvara might be. You maybe have glimpses of Ishvara, and you start valuing this deep inner consciousness more than what is outside. Right? So this in-between process, this onion peeling process, very carefully without hurting yourself too much, with tears coming into your eyes, that process is Antaranga Yoga. Right? And that's the in-between. That's the in-between where on one end you have asana and pranayama and yama and niyama, and the other end you have dhyana and samadhi. And this whole process of getting a mind that is capable of dharana, right? That whole process is Antaranga Yoga. Because the mind that normally starts this practice of yoga is a mind that's got awakened to the fact that I'm in dukkha. right? So this awakening has to take the next steps, right? And it takes a lot of work for the mind to be capable of dharana, which is, attentiveness. The normal everyday mind is not capable of attentiveness. And once you're capable of attentiveness, then you can go into the other uh, layers. And these are not practices. Those are just the consequence of the earlier practice. You cannot practice meditation. Meditation happens when your dharana is in the right place. Yeah, so what is generally taught now as meditation is technically bhavana, which is mental exercises. It is not meditation. Meditation is a very, very different thing.
Beautifully explained.
So are you?
We can't hear you, Arjun. You're speaking.
Yeah, I am speaking. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that that it's a process that probably happens naturally. You cannot force it to happen. You cannot force your
Yeah.
mind to.
You cannot force your mind into dhyana.
So is there
Yeah.
no way to expedite the process, or
No.
so then
Yeah.
are we left to like a very deterministic idea of life, like we have
No,
to
not
just,
at all.
because there
Not
is
at
no
all.
volition in
No,
in
why are you, Arjun, you're doing the favorite of well-educated people. The moment I say it is not this, you're creating a binary and you're saying, oh, then it must be the opposite of it. No, yeah, there are so many shades between these two, no? Yeah, so let me give you another analogy. Yeah, most of us in college have worked with tuning forks and trying to tune something so it vibrates to the tone of the tuning fork. You've done that?
yeah.
Yeah, most people will be playing guitar and all that these days, na? So if you want to tune it, you have to look at sympathetic vibrations, correct? Yeah, so if let's say you take a tuning fork that is dirty, right? You bring another clean tuning fork next to it. This will not vibrate, no? It's too dull, it's too dense, it's too full of all kinds of distortions in it. It cannot vibrate. So the entire process of Antaranga Yoga is to tune this frequency, tune this tuning fork, which is me, so that it can vibrate to the beauty of the world. It can vibrate to the subtlest nuances of the world around you. Yeah. So I'm a multiple tuning fork. I'm not a single frequency tuning fork. Right? I've got various levels and subtleties in me. Yeah. So if I awaken to all of that, I'll experience the world in all its glory, in all its beauty, and all its exactness. That is meditation. When I can spontaneously vibrate to the depth and the beauty of the world, I'm meditating. So I have to do things to be capable of that kind of sensitive experiencing of the world. And it's an experiencing full of rasa, full of beauty. So there are various stages till then, right? The first stage is, if you use a musical analogy, unless you go to a headbangers ball, you can't respond to music. It's got to come at you like that. It's got to hit you like bang, bang, bang. And then you say, some music is going on, right? And then maybe you proceed step by step, and then, right, you listen to some Bollywood music, and then you listen to some, little more classical, you listen to, then you finally come, you're able to listen to good jazz and classical music and so on. So there's a whole journey, yeah? And this journey, this whole process of making your entire psyche, your mind, your body. See, when you're speaking in English, it's a little difficult because immediately you have to use words like mind and body as though they're two separate things. Right? It's just one Prakriti. So how do you get this Prakriti to really be sensitive? And this Prakriti is capable of a vast multitude of sensitivities and levels of understanding, levels of response to the world. So how do you get this entire Prakriti to be as sensitive and as sharp as it can be? So for that, you have to do asana practice, not beer yoga. You have to do asana practice where you pay attention to the body. You have to do pranayama where you pay attention to your entire process. Pranayama is deeply connected with emotional structures. I promised you I'll tell you a story, na?
Yes.
Yeah. So long time back when I was teaching yoga at Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram, I remember teaching one, I think she must have been 40 odd years old. She'd been studying yoga and whatever, and she came to us. And in Krishnamacharya Yoga Mandiram, our tradition, we use a lot of breathing along with the asana practice. So I asked her to do a very simple asana, very simple pose. And she started weeping. Yeah, so I thought I had done something wrong. So I just waited and she sat down and she started talking about her divorce, which was at least 10 years old. Yeah, and she talked about how when she was in that posture and she was doing her breathing, something got released and a whole flood of memories came back and whatever, right? And this whole process actually was the beginning of a whole therapeutic process for her, right? And she actually had problems with her stomach, digestive issues, and so on. And it slowly started, it just dissolved, right? She came in looking old and she went out after 3-4 months of work looking lovely. So you don't need whitening cream, you just need good yoga and asana practice.
That's true, actually. It does work as therapy. I remember that some of us, and I know that some of my Sangha teachers are here as well. So we teach in different schools and different areas. And we've literally seen like tears in the eyes of people who've survived a lot of trauma and who have like sickness and illness. So it really does work through every single layer of the body. It's very beautiful the way it helps release and like helps you really feel your true self.
Yeah, but it's not just the asana process. It's a whole
Yes.
process of then looking at how one has structured the idea of the self. Yeah. So in yoga, there's a very important idea of asmita. Na? How do I identify and how do I say this is who I am? Yeah. And that whole process is founded on what is called avidya. Yeah? Avidya would mean assumptions and conclusions about myself and my world, which are wrong. Yeah. So to uncover your asmita, to do this, unpeeling of the onion, you have to go back and look at assumptions and conclusions that you have formed about yourself and about your world and about people around you. Yeah. And very often these conclusions have been formed, like you're saying, through trauma or through over-attachment, through dependencies, through a whole lot of underlying deep patterns, which are called samskaras. and even deeper layers of that called vasana. Yeah, so the entire process of being able to watch this, uncover it, and question it is the central process of Antaranga Yoga. And it's not as easy as I'm saying, because if there's a trauma on which you've come up with some conclusions, then opening up these conclusions, you have to be willing to touch the underlying emotive energy with which you're holding on to these ideas.
It's true. It's really just questioning our beliefs and thoughts, right?
No, it's not just questioning your beliefs and thoughts. It's looking directly at the mind and seeing the patterns. It's a way of making your mind sensitive so you can see directly what the patterns are, what is happening, being able to sense where you hold these tensions in the body and to work with them.
And does observation of these patterns let us get over the patterns, or it
Yeah.
has its own time to
No.
to
What
detach?
what the Yoga Sutra says, Arjun, is there's a very lovely sutra that says Dhyana heyaha tadvrittayaha. So the analogy that Yoga Sutra uses is of seeds on a ground. So avidya is the ground, and these mistaken ideas, yeah, of the self and the world are like seeds. Yeah. And usually we are aware of these only when they are acting out through us. So that is called the Udara level. Udara means like a full-blown tree. Right? Now, and since we are not sensitive, this is why I made the analogy to a really well-tuned instrument. No? So if it's a well-tuned instrument, you don't have to bang it to make sound. Yeah, it'll just vibrate on its own when there's a right frequency around, right? So these dampen this avidya, and these seeds just dampen the whole possibility of this system. Yeah. And when they're in a seed-like thing, you have to be very sensitive to see the seed, to experience the seed. So we normally don't. We only experience it at the acted out level. So the whole process of learning how to stay with this and watch it at the more, sprouting
Nascent
level and the
level.
seed
Yeah.
is the practice. So once you see it from there, then your dhyana agnina burns the seed. You don't have to do anything more. And this is a very critical thing, because the self-help books are full of what do you do? Yeah. How do you end this? How do you end your anger? How do you end this? How do you end that? Right. So when you jump back into this question, how do I do this? I'm actually going back to the same mind that created the avidya mind that created the problem. And with that mind, I'm trying to solve something that's much subtler, much deeper, which actually cannot be touched through words. So
How
as you clarify this, and as these seeds get burnt, let's say, their potency goes, every time you watch this carefully, the potency goes down. So you're able to release that energy. You become more sensitive. So it's a positive spiral that you get into. If you don't touch this, you get into a negative spiral of reinforcing.
So I was just about to ask you, Raghuji, sometimes, although we are witness to what's happening, and I know you mentioned there are lots of processes that are involved, but sometimes some of us are really stuck in manifesting repeated situations again and
Yeah.
again and again, and we
Yeah.
have the same patterns.
Correct.
So how do
That
we
is the
work through
pattern.
that?
That is the samskara and vasana. Yeah. So the first step is to even become aware that it is through these repetitive patterns that I'm creating my own dukkha. Yeah. Most of us have all kinds of explanations. That's why I said you have an idea of the self and an idea of the world. And very often in this idea of the world, I'm the victim and the world is the perpetrator. So if I'm in dukkha, yeah, I am such a nice guy. I mean, whatever. Yeah. So first is to say, hey, I'm getting into repeated patterns. Yeah. Today, what I say might get you agitated. Tomorrow, what Arjun says gets you agitated. Day after tomorrow, somebody else says something and you get agitated. Right? So the part of you that's getting agitated has got nothing to do with me or Arjun or anybody else, right? Yeah. So there's a whole theory of cause effect that underlies this study of yoga that talks to you about this whole pattern. It's a very interesting idea of cause effect. It's not the linear cause effect that you normally read about. Yeah. So there's a whole theory of cause effect that says that there is a trigger, there is some intellectual ability to draw a link between cause and effect, and there's something called upadana karana, right, which is the intrinsic quality of something. And how does the effect look at all of these complex things? Yeah, so the entire process of yoga is working with the upadana, the intrinsic reality. Yeah, to give you a simple idea of what is upadana, supposing it rains, na? This is a common analogy given in Sankhya. If it rains in the hill, the water will flow out. If it rains in a desert, right? If the desert is Okavango, you'll see the whole forest coming up for maybe a couple of months and then go down again, right? If it's rained somewhere else, in a rocky place, nothing will happen. You just disappear. So the effect and the cause are related through the intrinsic place in which this cause is happening. It's not just rain, therefore plants, rain, therefore water. So this upadana, to be able to look at it, is the process of Antaranga Yoga. So this vessel is not worked with, it's not capable of dhyana. It's not even capable of choosing the right place to put your attention to and to put your mind to, which is dharana. It's just caught with reactive responses to the world.
So Raghuji, what are actually some of the processes that you do teach in Antaranga Yoga? If you could just talk to us a little bit about that. How does one go through the whole process of like peeling the onion, getting through all of the emotions? Then, like, if you could just talk about some of those processes that you all teach.
Difficult. Yes. Let me just, give you one example maybe. See, one of the problems that's happening today is there's a fundamental idea in the Upanishads. Okay, that fundamental idea is that all learning takes place between the question and the answer. Yeah, so when you ask a really important fundamental question, yeah, your mind will not rest till it finds an answer. Okay, I'm not talking about simple questions, fundamental questions. It will not rest till it finds an answer. So what happens when you ask these fundamental questions? Now, like take a simple question like, who am I? Most Upanishads will start with this, right? So what do most people do? Dhrugur Vaivarunihi Pit Varunam Pitram Upasasara, whatever you start reading. So the son goes and asks the father, what is the world about and who am I? And questions like this. So the father says, go and meditate. So what do you and I do? We don't meditate with that question. We turn the page and look at the answer and believe that we know the answer. Luckily for us in this Upanishad, no answer is given. So the son comes back and he says, Annam Brahmeti Vyajanat. Okay. And then he says, you know what? I don't think I've got the full answer. So he repeats the same question again. The father gives the same answer. He says, go and meditate. So this guy meditates for a couple of years. He comes back and he says, Pranam Brahmeti. So the same process gets repeated after a long period of time. Now we want to turn the page and get the answer. We cannot get the answer. So this process of meditation is also called tapas. Yeah. So in this text specifically, it says tapo brahmeti, which means go and meditate, which is equal to tapas. Yeah. So you really have to ask a question that is, first of all, very important for you. And the second step is not to jump to an answer. Okay, the first thing we do is to go and ask somebody who we think knows the answer. Okay, that's the first thing you don't do. Yeah, because you get stuck with that answer, you've lost your question, you have not done any swadhyaya. Right? Second thing we do is to go take a book, self-help book written in California, most probably, and think that it's going to give you the answer. It's not going to give you the answer. Right? So what happens in between these two? In between these two, you get into anxiety. You get into various kinds of, I've got to find the answer. So a certain kind of heat develops. It's very important to stay with this heat of not knowing, because not knowing creates anxiety. And to say that I don't know, and to say that nobody can give me answers to important questions about the self and life is an extremely important first step. So all the practices we give you are processes of self-reflection. And the Yoga Sutra has got many, many ideas. So it will give you, it will say Maitri Karuna Mudito Pekshanam. Right? So it says, watch relationships. Where are you responding to people from? Are you capable of ahimsa? It doesn't say, do this. Yeah, so every Yoga Sutra is actually a question. And the answer does not lie in the Yoga Sutra. The answer lies in your practice. Right? So if you make the Yoga Sutra into an answer, it's a useless book. If you know how to take every sutra and convert it into a question, then it becomes a darshana. Then it becomes a mirror.
So to that, then I just have a question. You mentioned that the very first thing all of us do is go to somebody who knows the answer, right?
Correct.
But obviously a lot of it depends on our own self-reflection. So to that, then what role does a guru play in our life?
He helps you to peel the onion and watch the water come from your eyes without doing anything too much more than that. He gives you the right onion, maybe, and maybe teaches you some techniques for peeling it. And is there with you when you go through your, when you're peeling the onion, you might also unpeel some traumas, no? So you have to be in a context where there is a certain, what we call, in the Yoga Sutra, it's called Vitaraga Vishayam. It's the ability to listen quietly to you and be there with you when you're going through the disturbance. Because when you do this unpeeling, you're going to have a lot of reactions. So where do you do it? If you do it in a context which cannot listen to this carefully, it's going to reinforce the disturbance. That's why you got into the disturbance to start with. Right? So that's the context that's created, not just by a guru, but by a sangha. That's why sanghas are so important. That's why all learning, right from the Buddhist thing took place in sanghas with a lot of other people who are also interested, who are practicing a certain quality of listening, who are willing to listen to you from a contemplative space, right? That context is very important. We've lost that now because all teaching is happening in this industrialized way of teaching. There's bhashan being given from a pulpit. Bhashans from a pulpit do nothing to help you to transform. At best, it can make you feel guilty. Yeah.
Okay.
I have a question, but I'm a little bit, since you said, you have to do your own self-reflective work, so I'm not sure if I should ask. But-
Ask. Good fun, yeah.
So you mentioned that, I think a couple of few minutes back, you mentioned about if you observe a pattern, the pattern with the dharana agni, you're able to burn patterns. But you said that you have to be careful that it's not the mind that created the pattern is observing the pattern itself.
Yeah.
But how does one know if it is the mind or if it is the observer of the mind that is observing?
Yeah. Good question. See, this is where it's important to have people with whom you can dialogue. Yeah. I'll give you a simple example. Yeah. What we do to help this to happen. I work a lot with the Mahabharata stories. Yeah, because the Mahabharata stories are like a big compendium of life situations and various kinds of responses to life situations. And at one level, there's the Kaurava kind of response to a situation, and then there's a Pandava kind of response to a situation. Yeah, very broadly speaking. Yeah. So you take up anything. Okay, the most famous thing, the moment you say Mahabharata, everybody will think of Yudhishthira going and playing dice. Yeah. So we can start with that story. And then usually what happens is people go off into a kind of, condemning Yudhishthira as such an idiot and some moral discussion and this and that. All that is a waste of time. Yeah. So if you step back and you say, how am I like with Yudhishthira? Have I behaved like Yudhishthira? What part of me is like Yudhishthira? You're starting to take the first step into observation of yourself. Right? And then you come, you can quite easily get in touch with the Yudhishthira in me. The Yudhishthira in me, for example, is somebody who can get very obsessive about rules and regulations, right? Get very caught up with this should be, this should be. Yeah. And in that process, what do I do to myself? My own intuitions, my own thoughts, I push aside, right? Very often, what do I do? Any sense of enjoyment, any sense of impulse, I hold back. That is Yudhishthira. Yeah. If you see the Kutana, the traditional Indian theater, there are only two characters who don't dance very much in the Kuta. One is Yudhishthira, the other one is Vidura. Everybody else has a beautiful dance, right? Bhima will have a energetic dance, right? Arjuna will be the most brilliant dancer in that group. Yudhishthira will always do very slight. So I'm holding back all my energy. I'm holding back all my passion. When I get a chance, man, I'm going to gamble, right? That's the part of me, right? So once I start looking at these characters this way, I can look at my own patterns now and see where am I holding my compulsivity, how am I holding myself, and so on. And what did the Pandavas do whenever they goof up, Whenever they screw up, they go on a retreat. They go back and say, hey, where did I make a mistake? What is it in me that made me make this mistake? What do the Kauravas do? They just reinforce their behavior and say, how do I make sure that I win the next time? So how do I get into more greed? And so on and so forth. So the Mahabharata, in a sense, is a beautiful analogy for Antaranga Yoga.
Interesting.
Beautiful. Thank you.
So there are many
Raghuji.
possibilities. But you'll have to shed tears while you're. Yeah, not very easy, na? To look at yourself and say, you know what, there's a Duryodhana in me, not just a Bhima in me. Yeah, there's a Bhishma in me, not just a Yudhishthira in me, and so on. So I have to be willing to look at myself with a certain level of honesty and courage and so on. So the Yoga Sutra says that Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna, Purvaka, Itaresham. Says you need courage to look at yourself. And you need Shraddha, you need to stay on the path. You cannot say, oh my God, this is too difficult, so let me get off the boat.
Thank you.
Yeah, time for questions.
Yes, we'll open it up to our audience. So those who have questions, you may just use the raise hand option, and then we can go turn by turn and ask Raghuji questions.
I don't mind if you're
If you
okay
can
with
just
it. Can people come on the screen and speak
yeah.
to me? Otherwise, it's a little weird. Yeah, this medium gets me a little. Yeah, I'm quite okay to have people come on the
Sure.
screen
I mean, we can
and
do that,
ask
yeah.
the question if that's
We'll just-
possible.
Yeah, we'll pin them when they're asking the questions. Hello. Yeah, Christian. All right, we'll just pin you once again. In fact, Hari, can you? Okay. Okay.
Yes. So the voice is audible?
Yeah, sure.
Hello.
Louder, maybe?
Yeah.
Yes, it's okay now. Better? Yes. So the question is, what is the role of intellectual inquiry in the process of self-understanding, or observation, blank observation, the only thing?
It's not blank observation. I don't know what you mean by intellectual inquiry. Reading a book and asking, what is Brahman, what is this, is useless. Okay, the books themselves say that, but you keep on reading it thinking you can understand. Right? Very clear. The Upanishad says, Yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasa saha. You cannot reach these places with your mind or with words. Yeah. And it's not blank observation. Yeah. What's your mind like when you look at a beautiful sunset?
Sorry?
Is it blank? Yeah, if you have to appreciate the beauty of a sunset, your mind has to be very sensitive, very awake. You have to look at nuances of the colors. Yeah, you'll probably be listening to bird sounds and the beauty. Yeah, all your senses will be awake. Yeah. If your senses are not fully awake and you're not sensitive, you cannot appreciate beauty. Yeah. That's the mind with which you observe yourself. Fully awake, extremely sensitive. Yeah, there's a beautiful story of Mullah Nasiruddin who says you have to watch your mind the way a cat is waiting next to the mouse hole for the mouse to come out. Right? What he doesn't say is the mouse is also watching the cat from inside the mouse hole. So watch your mind like that cat. Yeah, it's not blank at all. Every nerve of it is finely tuned. Otherwise, it's not going to have dinner. And the rat has to be careful because it's got its babies inside its home. It doesn't want to get caught. That's the mind of the observer.
ठीक है सर.
Okay. Do we have any others with questions?
Um,
Yes, Vineet?
Yeah, I had a question. So, like, so we do these various practices, right? So we do meditation, and actually, I also subscribe
Do you?
to this. Yeah, and I also subscribe to this Mahabharata exploration online. So, do all of these different ways are kind of leading towards the same goal, or it's the same journey?
Yeah, it's always
Right.
the same journey, na? The journey is to discover the true nature of your Atman. Except that with this mind, you cannot discover it. You have to have a mind that can vibrate at a very, very subtle frequency. That mind is called Shuddha Sattvam. So right now, the mind we have is full of malam. So through various practices, you have to get it to a mind which is called Shuddha Sattvam. So the Shuddha Sattva mind can reflect Atman. You
Okay.
never know Atman. See, the problem is there are all these words that are used, na? Knowing the self, and the word know in English is not at all translatable
It's
into
19
jnana
hours.
or into prajna. These words have a completely different depth of meaning. The word know is equal to panditya in yoga. Panditya is intellectual knowledge, some book knowledge. That is not what is being talked about here. So you have to develop that mind.
Okay. And one more question, right? And before attending this talk, I think the way you started also, you always used to consider like meditation being primarily about the mind and yoga being about the physical body. So it seems like this is also towards the
Priya,
mind.
Priya, this is the ice and the steam.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I'm curious.
yes,
So now
Vineet.
it seems, yeah. So it seems like the journey is towards that inner exploration and inner transformation, inner
Of
awareness.
course.
So
Of
what
course.
is about the physical body, right? Because I know we do these various asanas also for the physical well-being as well.
See, Vineet, the West doesn't understand anything which cannot be measured. Okay, so there's a long history of this. One of the people who started psychology, one of the earliest people is called William Wundt. He talked about introspection. Now, very soon he was thrown out saying, what is the self? How can you show it? How can you measure it? There's another person called Edmund Husserl, who came up with very nice ideas, not very different from some contemplative practices and Buddhist stuff and all that. He's been pushed, he was a psychologist, he's been pushed into philosophy, and philosophy is considered useless for life. There's another guy called William James who started working with this after having had a lot of conversations with Vivekananda. He even wrote a book called Religious Experiences and so on. All of them have been sidelined because you can't measure the self. You can't give evidence for the self, right? And Shankaracharya starts his whole thing saying, what evidence do you want that you have a body except that you are a body? What evidence do you need that you have a mind except that it can think, and so on? So we have followed in India a very different form of looking at the mind, which is completely introspective. right? And the body is not different, it's just another form of Prakriti. So to answer your question, we have to go into the cosmos of Sankhya, which is very different from the current Western understanding of life. Love is chemistry, man, according to neurophysicists. Come on, I don't want to look at life as love as chemistry, man. Love is much more than chemistry. Yeah, so if you're caught with the love is chemistry kind of a framework, you'll be talking, having all these questions, not body and mind, and this is only physical, this is only this. Sure, if you do good asana practice, your hippocampus will become bigger, your amygdala, something will happen. Yeah, great. But come on, do the practice and see what happens to you when you really enter this practice with your full mind and full heart. Don't tell me that, my vagal system will improve. That's for some scientist, man. I want to live life. I want to love. What is this evidence got to do with living life and loving? That's what yoga is all about. So if you need that evidence, go look for that evidence and then come. But don't you have evidence that you're living in dukkha? Should you do something about it? Why do you need the scientific evidence to come and start working with yourself and saying, how do I get rid of dukkha and how do I reach ananda? How colonized have we got?
Yeah. Okay.
I have a question if I can ask, or if it's too late, I could, I don't know, chat. Is it okay to ask a question now?
Yes, Samya.
Okay, yeah. So the question that I have is, I'll try to frame it in a single line, but I'm just wondering, we talk about dharma and we talk about how, dharma is relative to people, but in the context of a universal, code of conduct, if I could say that. I'm just wondering, how does this play out in, with the set of values that I uphold, or with the set of things that I hold as dharma? How does that play out in the real world? Like, in the world of, let's say, for example, corporate politics, or in the world of relationships where, one might not be dharmic in the way that I understand. So I'm just trying to understand how do we navigate through something like this?
See, there are 2-3 things here, Samya. It's a difficult question that you're asking. Good question. See, in Mahabharata, the word dharma is defined very, very simply. The question that it asks, and it says it in so many different ways over and over again, the fundamental question is your action enlivening you? Is it enlivening people you're with? Is it enlivening the world around you? That's the fundamental question. Okay. Now, also in yoga, what it says is that a mind that is not caught with avidya will naturally act with ahimsa and satyam and so on. That's the natural tendency. Yeah. So when you see somebody in difficulty, the natural tendency for a human being who's sensitive and not caught with the modern so-called values is to go and help. Yeah, not to ask, are you a Pakistani? Are you so-and-so? If you're Pakistani, I won't help you. Yeah, this is a very corrupt mind, right? So the reality is that in today's world, this kind of a corrupt mind, which I'm calling the colonizing mind, it's everywhere, is the norm. So who is held up today as the greatest hero? Yeah, some corporate honcho who is extracting money, who's doing things that are not dharmic, and so on, is held up as a big hero. So we are living in a world like that, and we have to make choices. What choice would you like to make? Would you like to act in a way that enlivens you, enlivens people around you and the world simultaneously? Or do you want to do things which you know is going to bring disaster to the world very soon? Yeah. Which is
Yeah.
climate disaster, so on. They're all waiting for you, Soumya. I'm probably going to be dead and gone in another few years. Yeah. 2040, 2050, you're going to be having temperatures of whatever, +2 degrees centigrade and so on.
Yeah.
So bye. I hope I'm gone before that. So it is a very critical question for many of you to ask and see what to do about it. And dharma is a very simple question. It's got nothing to do with the code of ethics, nothing. It's a simple human question. Everybody knows. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do people who do criminal things be so secretive about it? Because they know in their hearts that what they're doing is extractive and criminal.
Right.
Right? There are only a few psychopaths around, luckily. Some of them get to the top of organizations, apparently. Yeah, so that's a reality, and we have to make choices.
Mm.
And it's got nothing to do with any external code, nothing. It's got to do with being a well-tuned instrument. And you know when what you're doing is harming somebody or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
There was someone else before who was asking a question, just before Soumya asked. Um,
No, the
Kala.
questions? Yeah.
Okay. If you're camera shy, you can just put your questions probably here. I don't know if that works with you, Raghuji, because some people direct message me saying
Sure,
they
sure.
have a question.
Sure, no problem.
Right.
Kala, do you want to just unmute yourself or type out your question?
I think she's probably not online. Anyway, I think that's fine.
Okay. So, if there are no other questions, Raghuji, do you have any last few words you want to share before we kind of close the session?
Last few words. Actually, you know what? The practice is very simple, yeah. Practice is just to listen. Listen really carefully to what you're saying. Listen carefully to what you're doing, listening carefully to other people. That's all. Unfortunately, we're not listening. Yeah. So that's the ultimate simple practice of yoga, is to really listen.
Thank you. Okay. So with that, I'd just like to thank Raghuji so much for really being an inspiration and guiding so many seekers on their spiritual paths. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for talking to us about Antaranga Yoga. And for any others who have any questions or want to reach out to us, you're very welcome to write to us at Sarveda Life, or reach out to us on FB or Instagram. And also if you wish to reach out to Raghuji, The address is ashram@ritambara.org.in. And just one last thing. So at Sarveda, we are really creating a global community for conscious living by integrating ancient practices of yoga and Ayurveda for modern lives. And as a part of our Jnana series, we generally host a lot of eminent speakers, and we are going to be starting our courses soon. So we are going to start the introduction to Vedanta by Dr. Giridhar very soon. And then last week we had Swami Yoga Ratna ji. She's going to be offering the Yoga Nidra and Yoga Therapy course as well. And we're super excited to collaborate with you also, Raghuji, in future. So just thank you so much for all of your time. And we do hope to see everybody at our future Jnana series. Stay hope and hope you have a lovely rest of the weekend.
Thank you, Arjun.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That was
Thank
good
you.
fun.
Lovely having you.
Same here.
So much to learn from you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.